Chevy saw the film, Lorraine saw the movie, Billy Crystal, Garrett saw the film, Alan Zweibel saw the film. Everyone's been really lovely. Everyone's been really complimentary. Chevy has a strange way of giving a compliment. He goes, well, you should be embarrassed. That literally is that's a 10.
Hi, I'm David Crow with Den of Geek, and I'm live from New York with Jason Reitman, the director and co-writer of Saturday Night. How often do I get to say that? When talking about Saturday Night Live and Saturday Night, you obviously very much grew up aware of this world. But what were maybe some of your earliest memories or perceptions of SNL and that original cast specifically?
Well, I remember seeing an episode of Saturday Night Live and thinking this must be something they do once a year. It felt too special to be something that they put on every single week, that they create a 90-minute show with music and comedy, and that there would be, parody commercials. I couldn't fathom that. And as soon as I found out that it was every Saturday, I just wanted to stay up every Saturday night and see it.
I grew up the same way, but for you specifically, maybe did your father ever tell you stories, not just of working with, some of these people, but I know maybe he knew John Belushi and Bill Murray a little bit in that New York scene.
My father actually directed the National Lampoon show, which was a live show that had John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, before Saturday Night Live. So Lorne and my father were both moving through similar circles of comedy in Toronto when they were younger. And I feel like what my father did for film, Lorne did for television. Mm-hmm. So these were people that I met, even though some I don't remember. I met John Belushi, but do not remember him. And of course, I grew up on the set of Stripes and Ghostbusters and met a lot of these comedians, and then even got a chance to meet, Billy Crystal, because my father made a movie with him a year later.
And then you would end up working with a lot of these people yourself years later and have your own relationship with them. And I'm curious, did that at all affect your perception of not just who they were, but what they achieved back then?
Honestly, if anything, it just made me realize they're human beings. I think it was probably easier for me to portray Dan Aykroyd because I knew him already as a person, and I could call him on the phone and ask him questions.
Did he give you any advice for this movie?
Well, my writing partner, Gil Ken, and I actually interviewed every living person we could find that was in the room on October 11th, 1975. So Gil and I spoke to Lorne Michaels, we spoke to Rosie Schuster, we spoke to Dick Ebersol, we spoke to all the writers, the cast, people in the production design, in costume design, members of Billy Preston's band. We really tried to gather as many stories as we could, and this movie, Saturday Night, is like a weaving together of their memories.
For the viewers at home, could you maybe explain the setup of the film if they don't know?
Yeah, sure. So Saturday Night actually starts at 10 p.m. on October 11th, 1975, with Lorne Michaels standing out on 50th Street looking for Andy Kaufman, and thus begins a 90-minute straight-shot roller coaster to the first time Chevy Chase ever said live from New York, it's Saturday Night.
Over the years, did you ever entertain the idea of doing a movie about early SNL that maybe was more of a biopic, where instead of in real time, it would have spanned years?
No, I've never really been interested in doing a biopic about Saturday Night Live. I have thought a lot more about how to do a movie in 90 consecutive minutes than I have about doing a biopic about anything. Mm-hmm. And, my father once told me, always make sure you know the difference between your plot and your location. SNL turned out to be the perfect location to do a movie about 90 consecutive minutes of a group coalescing, and that's what excited me.
Were there any rules that you and Gil placed on yourselves about what you could or could not do when adapting real people's, lives and memories?
Not really. I think we had an instinct about what the tone of this film was going to be, and we collected all these memories and started to just kind of build them on a tree. We had this skeleton. We knew we're going to start 90 minutes before showtime. We knew the movie was going to end with Live from New York. It's Saturday Night. And at that point, it becomes almost based on the geography of the building. I had been a guest writer at Saturday Night Live back in 2008, and I remembered the 8th and ninth floor and where the stairwells were, the elevators were, and how the hallways connected. And so I had this sense of where the characters could weave, how they would get into the control room and back out onto the stage floor. And a lot of it was actually based on, well, this conversation could happen in this hallway because it takes us from the elevator bank to the control room. And then this conversation could be on the stairway that's inside, taking us from the 8th to the ninth floor into Lorne's office. So much of it was about geography.
So much of this is also such an ensemble piece. Many of your movies tend to be about a single character or maybe a handful of characters going on a journey. So is it liberating or maybe a little intense to now have 30 plus characters who are all going on their own journey?
So there's 80 speaking roles in Saturday Night, and then there are 80 background actors who work every single day, who I also cast all of them in person. And they were taken through a process, a boot camp where they actually learned how to do their jobs, or they are, whether they're camera people or sound people or stage managers, stage hands. There's something really fun about dropping the audience into a living, breathing world. And I think that's what all of our goal was. We knew we wanted to create a document that felt like it was from 1975. It's like why we shot on 16 mil. And we wanted the audience to be dropped into this immersive world and to be looking around trying to figure out who are all these characters, what is happening, and that you have to come up to speed very quickly. We don't hold your hand in this movie.
Well, I want to talk about the look of the movie. I loved it. You mentioned 16 millimeter. There's a real graininess to the film. Yeah. I just like the way the 30 Rock's neon lights are shot and lit in this movie. Yeah. It reminds me of a comfortable scuzziness from a New York gone by.
Yeah. When you look at the Scorsese movies back in the 70s, there's a way that the neon dances. Mm-hmm. And if you like movies, these are the kinds of things that you just fall in love with and you remember and you wonder what gives them that sense. And the first time we saw the dailies back, you saw the NBC 30 Rock neon outside on 50th Street in 16 mil, and you're like, that's it. And there's there's an inherent kind of warmth to the film that gives it a vintage quality. And as the camera begins to move and pan around the hallways of the 8th and ninth floor, it's that extra thing. It's that dancing grain that makes you feel like you're really there.
Yeah, I was both thinking Taxi Driver and strangely Ghostbusters a little bit. It's
something that people often forget about Ghostbusters, how gorgeously it was shot. It was shot by Laszlo Kovacs, and the color palette of it is really interesting. The color palette of Ghostbusters is actually really clean. We have these associations with the color. People associate it with purple, I think, because of the purple skies above Dana or its apartment building, or the green of Slimer. But the actual color palette is very grayscale. The uniforms are grayscale. The car is white, and it's beautifully shot.
You obviously, as we've been discussing, done a ton of research for this movie, but were there one or two stories you either discovered during those interviews, or maybe you've known your whole life that you're like, I need to make sure that these get into this movie?
I mean, it's so funny because as we're doing these interviews, we're just scrolling down every detail that we hear from, Dick Ebersol wearing these denim patch jackets, and we're like, all right, I guess we're going to have to make these somehow. But the most interesting new thing that we learned was that Lorne Michaels originally was going to do Weekend Update. That's something I'd never read, never heard, and Lorne said it, Chevy confirmed it, and it represented something really interesting to me, which is that Lorne used to be a performer. But in doing Saturday Night Live, he had to realize, I'm the producer now. I'm dad. And I'm creating this home for all these wayward comedians, but I can't just be one of the comedians. And I know what it feels like as a director. Sometimes as a director, you want to hang, you want to be one of the kids. And you have to realize, wait, I'm dad.
At that point in his career, he was a few years older, but he was still of the same generation.
Oh, 100%. He turned 30 that first season. And Chevy was 30, and Garrett was a little bit older, but everyone else was in their 20s. Dan Aykroyd was 23 years old, which is hard to fathom now. Lorraine Newman was even younger.
That mustache ages you. But,
yeah.
One thing I didn't know until fairly recently was that the Muppets were cast members or contributors to that first season.
Yeah.
And for that matter, I didn't know that the writers tried to hang Big Bird, an effigy from an office.
The writers tied a belt around Big Bird's neck and hung him from my dressing room door.
Hey, I heard about Big Bird. So sorry. Autoerotic asphyxiation, who knew?
Yeah, it's funny because obviously Jim Henson is brilliant and has touched all of our lives. He was not a good fit at Saturday Night Live. They just didn't get along. And, Gil Kennan and I immediately knew that we wanted Nick Braun to play Jim Henson. We knew that was exactly the kind of right sense of humor, just to get the tone right and have fun with it.
How did you come to the idea of Nick playing several roles?
Oh, it's interesting. Benny Safdie was actually going to originally play Andy Kaufman. And Benny's a huge Andy Kaufman nut. And he was locked in, and then his movie got greenlit, and we lost him. And as we began to have conversations about, all right, who would be a great Andy Kaufman, we kept on going, well, Nick Braun would also be a great Andy Kaufman. And one day it just hit us, well, if on SNL you could play multiple characters, why can't you do that in the movie?
I wouldn't say there's a lot of overlap in terms of who Andy Kaufman or Jim Henson were.
No. No, I mean, they're really different human beings. But Nick's a fantastic actor, and he's great in both roles.
I don't know if it's true or not, but one of the really funny scenes for me in the movie was when O'Donoghue, the head writer, has a long wind up to a joke about Christ and Satan with these censors. Yeah. Was that based on a specific incident? No, that literally just came out of my brain. I would just one day I called Gil up and I said I have a scene for O'Donoghue. I'm really fond of him as a comedian. He was a brilliant writer. He's obviously as dark as they come. I wish I had gotten the opportunity to interview him myself, but it felt like it was in his voice. It did. From what I've heard, Johnny Carson was, cautiously accepting that the show was going to exist, at least until he watched it. Mm-hmm. But were he or Dave Tebbutt or anyone at NBC really angling to see the show fail before its first episode? Everything I got from my interviews was the sense that the folks at NBC did not want to see the show succeed. The show was a pain in the ass. Everything that Lorne wanted to do was to upend how they made television. And that goes from the details of bringing in a production designer who had only worked on Broadway, who wanted to lay down an actual brick floor on the stage, down to the amount of mics that they wanted to record the band, to the way that they wanted to take command of master control and actually decide when they would cut to commercial and cut back to program within their own control room. Lorne was demanding, and he had a vision. And it's actually a way that I related to him, because it's kind of like being a director. You have this idea in your head, but it's undescribable. And you have to pull people along, even though they can't know exactly what's in your head, because one day they'll see it and they'll get it. And I think you seem to want to draw a line that obviously live television goes back to the beginning of television, mm-hmm. but there was a real resistance to this version of it, this iteration, what Lorne was building in the 70s. Yeah, we have Milton Berle, for example, in the movie. And Milton Berle wasn't actually there opening night, but he represents an idea. Milton Berle represents the history of vaudeville leading to radio, leading to, variety shows of the 1960s and 70s. And they're archaic. And SNL was the Woodstock moment for television. What Woodstock was to music, what The Graduate and Five Easy Pieces and Harold and Maude were to cinema, SNL was to television. The first time that you had a show that actually reflected the generation that was coming up, that grew up on TV, that wanted to see themselves on TV. And yeah, the people at SNL, the people at NBC had zero interest in change. It's really a movie about generational shift, about that young people who ripped television out of the hands of the elders. Related to that, one of the most poignant moments to me in the movie was when Lorne Michaels comes down to the ice rink at 30 Rock and finds Belushi and Gilda, and those are obviously the two cast members who are no longer with us. Yeah. Was it important to you to acknowledge their loss? This was an idea by Peter Rice, our producer, who said, it'd be lovely if there was a scene with John and Gilda, and you acknowledge somehow that they're not going to be around to see everything that SNL becomes. And I really loved that.
And so the idea on the ice rink was to have Gilda talking about what it's like to be nostalgic for a moment while you're living it.
Obviously, again, you know a lot of the people who worked on this show. Has Danny seen the movie yet?
No, I keep on trying to organize a screening for Aykroyd. Aykroyd lives out on a farm in Ontario, and I just haven't been able to arrange it, not for lack of trying.
What about, has Lauren seen the movie?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll ever actually find out. I mean, to be fair, Lauren's making a television show right now. He's been very lovely. I mean, he's very, very complimentary and sent me lovely notes after the festival and stuff. But I don't know.
Have you heard from people who worked on the show 50 years ago? Have they talked to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Chevy saw the film, Lorraine saw the movie, Billy Crystal Garrett saw the film, Alan Zweibel saw the film. Everyone's been really lovely. Everyone's been really complimentary. Chevy has a strange way of giving a compliment. You know, he goes, well, you should be embarrassed, but everyone's actually been very kind.
That's about the highest praise you could expect.
Yeah, I know. I think that's like, that literally is, that's a 10. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming by, and I could talk to you about this movie for hours longer, but I really did enjoy it, and
thank you very much.
Congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's cool to be here in the den.
Live from New York.